Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Let's talk about the full moon in Gemini coming up next week. It's the last full moon for 2022. Can't believe we've arrived at the end of 2022 already. Time just seems to be ever more elusive as we continue on this evolutionary journey. It's been a really tough year, I think, for many people actually. We know that because of our personal experiences to begin with, and obviously what's happening collectively. Taurus, Scorpio, solar and lunar eclipses have really smashed 2022. It's been really difficult, but there's been a lot of personal growth, I think, a lot of clearing out and cleaning our path, our associates, our connections, our desires, our future prospects, things that we're wanting to further expand on and grow with. There's been a lot of have to let things die, let a lot of things leave our life that just need to leave. And that's always, I think, a pretty challenging experience for all of us, any ending is a death, right? But the beautiful thing about that is that it's always followed by a new birth, a new beginning. But it's a death is a death, is a death is a death. It's never easy. It's Pluto's world. It's the domain of Pluto, and therein is the soul, and also our unconscious attachments, desires, fears, insecurities, a number of different things lie dormant in the unconscious stream within all of us. And when you have activations by Taurus, Scorpio, which is largely to do with our physical attachment to earthly things, including the physical body, and the opposite, that Scorpio, being the soul's desires and what needs to be transformed in order for our evolution to continue. That's never a walk in the park. And so here we are, sort of first week of December, approaching the full moon in Gemini, which is a pretty, it's the last full moon of 2022. And, it's like going out with a bang, so to speak, right? Because it's conjunct Mars. In fact, this full moon has like really quite a lot of aspects to it actually. But the two closest aspects are actually a conjunction from Mars, and Mars is closest to the Earth at the moment. And literally, I don't know if you guys have been going out and observing the night sky, but Mars has looked incredibly bright. You can literally see a bright orange, light, as it were. Jupiter, Moon have been conjunct the last couple of nights. That's been a beautiful thing to witness as well. But Mars is very, very close to the Earth, from a astronomical level, and we can really open our mind to what that might mean in terms of I suppose, the physical embodiment, psychological, emotional, and spiritual, for that matter. The energy is just, pulsating really closely to us, as it were. And this full moon is going to be right there smack bang with Mars. So Mars will be in Gemini, the full moon's in Gemini, 16 degrees opposite the sun at 16 degrees of Sagittarius. And the other closest aspect to the sun is a quincunx, or in conjunct aspect, from Uranus. So we've got Mars and Uranus, the closest aspected to this full moon, to the sun and the moon. Mars and Uranus energy is pretty crazy, pretty radical, pretty explosive, unpredictable, exciting, disruptive. It brings a lot of different characteristics, and I'll read a couple of things in a minute. But let's just bring up the chart for the full moon. And as always, locate the full moon in your own birth chart. That's the most personalized way to understand how this full moon is lighting things up for you. That's what the full moon does. It's a bright light in the sky, and it literally symbolizes the illumination of things in our own life, and certainly, on the collective as well. Now, on the collective stream, there's so much going on politically, with celebrities, with the medical field. Things are just sort of erupting and going sort of even more insane, if that was ever possible. Lots of this Mars in Gemini, has been such an interesting journey to observe, because it's retrograde. It's obviously spending a lot more time in Gemini, as we know, and it's going to be there till early next year. And during this full moon, as you can see here, there's Mars retrograde, exactly conjunct the full moon, and obviously exactly opposite the sun. So we have, mutable energy emphasized very, very prominently during this full moon. The mutable energy is defined by mutable signs, which is Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo. So Ceres is in Virgo, and she's a very important body as well. She's a little bit too far away, from this full moon, but I mean, it depends what kind of orbs you want to use. We could say this is like a grand mutable cross, right, between Ceres, Sun, Moon, Mars, and Neptune, Juno, could even throw in Jupiter. Now, Jupiter just went direct a couple of days before this full moon. So Jupiter's energy is changed directions because it was retrograde, and here it is at the 29th degree, right at the end. We're nearing the end of Pisces and preparing to get ready to step into Aries, and possibly give us that opening again to Jupiter in Aries in order to initiate the new cycle that we will all be stepping into relative to Jupiter, which is a 12-year cycle, right? So it's a big deal that Jupiter's finally finishing off in Pisces. And the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction really has been so strongly correlated to natural catastrophes, such as floods and things like that. We've had overwhelming floods here in Australia, not necessarily where I live, but other states. And there's been, huge devastation for a lot of people. A couple of years ago, we had the fires, huge devastation at that time, and certainly affecting people's personal lives and homes and things like that. But our wildlife, was the saddest thing for me, because a home can be rebuilt, and yes, other animals will be born, but the suffering that those animals would have endured is too painful for me to even think about. I remember that time very clearly. And now in the last few months, we've had, enormous floods here in this country. I put that down to Neptune and Jupiter. Anyway, there's a lot of, collective or even individual disasters that happen on the Earth plane are not something new. We always see that at different times, but there are very specific planetary configurations and alignments that seem to be the activators for those sorts of events. So I think the Mars in Gemini conjunct the moon is not an easy energy, right? It really isn't. I mean, if you are a person who has a Moon Mars aspect in your chart, please comment below and let me know. And let me know briefly. You don't have to go into very, you don't have to write an essay, but just a couple of comments of how it feels to have a Moon Mars aspect in your chart. It's not an easy aspect. The moon, very simply put, needs to feel safe, right? It seeks for security and safety and nurture. It's a very subconscious, unconscious body of energy, if you like. Corresponds to instinctual, habitual patterns of behavior and things like that, but fundamentally seeks to feel security and safety. And Mars is the planet of war, anger, passion, desire, willpower. And so you've got the moon is an energy that absorbs, and Mars is an energy that pushes out, right? So you can imagine the combination of moon Mars. Obviously, Mars is going to color the moon, and the way it's going to color the moon is that it's going to inject it with a lot of feeling towards the emotional nature, right? So our emotional reactions, in other words, during a full moon in Gemini conjunct Mars can be really over the top. And Mars is not by its very nature, it's not a reflective archetype, as it were. It's an archetype that speaks to action and pushes energy out. So it will act and then it might think. In this case, it will think because it's in Gemini, but it's likely to blurt out whatever it's going to blurt out and then think about the consequences later. It's a very instinctual energy as well. It rules Aries and Scorpio, so it's heavily tied into our instincts. It's heavily tied into the unconscious components of us as well. And so you have all these unconscious elements and subconscious elements, Moon, Mars, which equates to being very reactive to things that trigger us, right? And that can be, typically in this case, I suspect it's going to be in dialogue, conversation, ideas, personal opinions. Always remember when it comes to Gemini, at a very basic archetypal psychological personality level, Gemini is the archetype that, beyond any shadow of a doubt, it is the sign that actually splits things up into right, wrong, good or bad, my personal opinion, period. So Mercury is the ruler to Gemini, right? And Mercury is such an interesting and fascinating planet. We sometimes underestimate its power, actually. In Hermetic teachings and so forth, it's the magician. Mercury is the trickster. It's the only planet that was able to go into all the spheres, all the worlds, hence being the messenger god and so forth. So Mercury is a very, very tricky planet. Go back into his story, into his myth, where he created that instrument called the lyre, where he traced his steps backwards, which is Mercury retrograde, in order to hide things that he did which were naughty, stealing things and so forth. And so these are characteristics that come in when we think about Mercury as well. It's quite a remarkable archetypal energy and can be genius in certain streams of thinking as well and so forth. So it has great things about it. But in Gemini, Mars in Gemini and retrograde and conjunct the full moon, it's quite a loaded full moon relative to our own mind, our own personal opinions, and how we might be shooting those arrows, as it were, without really giving enough thought or contemplation or reflection on the words that we are actually using and why we are saying what we are saying, and I think this will be, sort of quite prominent in the sphere of family and relationships, because it is a full moon, and the moon clearly always corresponds to family dynamics as well. And further to that, the sun being opposite Mars here as well is really a very powerful energy. It's two planets of will, ego, personality, basically opposing each other. oppositions generally are a conflicting energy until the energy is integrated and met with some diplomacy and some awareness. Awareness is the best word for oppositions. But until we find that middle ground, the tendency with oppositions is to always project one energy onto another. So when you have a Mars Sun opposition transit, and in this case with a full moon, you're looking at certain people will be identifying with the Sun in Sagittarius, and the Mars will be projected onto the opponent, because opponent is a good word for oppositions, and certainly for a Mars Sun opposition. And someone has to win. That's the problem when you're talking about Sun Mars. It can bring up irritability, anger, conflict, and battle, the desire to be victorious and win in the position that somebody holds, whatever that may be. It could be an opinion, it could be a specific action towards something, and so forth. And so for those reasons, it can bring up, unnecessary conflict. Sometimes it can bring up the very conflict that is necessary in order for things to be confronted, and then, one can redirect the energy and move on, so to speak, right? So I've always said that sometimes conflict can be healthy, provided it's a situation that enables things to come to a head, as it were, in order for things to be cleared up, right? I'm certainly not referring that to violence and abuse and things of that nature, but this signature can bring up a lot of that stuff. Given that we've got the World Soccer at the moment, which I love, by the way, and I've been watching the games, this is a wonderful energy for the football ground, because that's where this energy really is activated to its greatest potential, in most cases with no one being harmed, but somebody winning the competition. It's a very competitive energy, and that hence why it brings up the theme of, I've got to win, I've got to fight this person, I've got to fight this situation, and I've got to win in this situation. And both people will feel the same, because the Sun and Mars have a very similar frequency in that way. When we're talking about it from a personality, ego, competitive, combative type of situations. So I guess, depending on your life circumstances and where this full moon is lighting things up in your chart, you might want to just be aware of what it's activating within you, and if the conflict or confrontation that it's bringing up is something that's worthwhile, or is it just an unnecessary unconscious activation of things that are unconscious inside you, because the Sun Mars can activate very unconscious dispositions within us that we ourselves weren't even aware we felt like that, right? So it's a very tricky energy, because anything that rises from the unconscious typically will catch us off guard. We're not prepared for it. This is a very dynamic, active energy, right? So that's contained within this full moon. And of course, we have the full moon in the axes of Sag and Gemini. And so where did this lunation cycle begin? The new moon began 2 weeks ago in Sagittarius, which held a lot of hope and a lot of possibilities. It was a really beautiful new moon, actually. But 2 weeks later, this new moon has now come to its full moon position, and Mars is there. And Mars is a problem. It's a malefic planet. At best, when we can use it with consciousness and awareness, we can really tap into the source of Mars to help us activate or even integrate the alignment of our own personal desires and will, right, with our highest will, which is Pluto, of course. So, when we can use the energy, or, feel into that energy, tap into that energy from that position, there can be really amazing things experienced or accomplished or understood illuminated in our own consciousness, right? Because it's a full moon, it's illumination. I just want to say though that with a full moon as well, it is also possible to start something at this time. You don't often hear that. The most typical thing we hear is that it's a new moon, this is a time to begin something. That is correct, absolutely. But it's not incorrect to be aware that during a full moon, you might start something as well. Why is that the case? Because when there is a full moon, you have a greater ability to see certain things that perhaps you couldn't see during the new moon. Remember, the new moon is a dark moon. It's like planting a seed in a pot plant. You have the intention, you put seeds of roses in a pot plant, and the intention is to see those seeds become roses and blossom and so forth. And typically that's what they will become, but you can't see it until it actually starts to blossom and grow and so forth, right? It's very much the same with a new moon. You set very specific intentions. It doesn't always follow that the intentions we set during a new moon will actually always come to fruition. And I'm sure many of you will be able to relate to that and say, yep, you know, there's been many times where I've set a particular intention with a new moon and I didn't see it come to fruition. Now, there are many reasons for that, but still, it's not to disencourage you from setting intentions during new moons. But I just want to point out that it is also very possible to begin something new during a full moon because you have that clarity, that awareness, that sense of illumination. Because you are seeing something more clearly, through that clarity, you might make a very specific decision to begin something, right? So it's logical when you think about it like that. So the Mars, as I said, it concerns me a little bit because it is quite a volatile energy there with the full moon. It is retrograde, so Mars retrograde is fairly frustrated. It's not a natural position for Mars it doesn't feel at home because Mars is go, go, go. It's about action, initiation. It's about doing things. And, you know, Mars in retrograde has to kind of stop. The brakes have sort of been hit, as it were, and it's trying to move ahead, and it's sort of a bit of a push-pull kind of momentum, right? So it's a bit frustrated already just from that. And in this case, because it's in Gemini, it does have very much to do with our own personal opinions and what we think is correct, what we think is the truth and so forth. And what we think is the truth is not necessarily always the truth. So I think the matter of truth and personal opinions really comes to light here because Neptune forms a square to the sun and a square to the moon, meaning a square to the full moon, a T-square in other words. And so even though this aspect is a little bit further on from what the Mars and Uranus is, it's got a very big story here with the Neptune, and of course Neptune is still within range of squaring Mars as well. So we're really at a position where it's what have I been saying, thinking, listening to? How much of it is truth? What sort of ideologies, beliefs have I had? And what about any of that is truth? What am I listening to and feeling into when I'm connecting with the world, with anything I'm listening to, anything I'm communicating, the news, the media, you know, the stuff that's been told as though it's gospel, and it's very far from gospel most of the time. So Neptune is universal truth and universal love. And the sun in a more, at a higher sort of level is our spirit energy. So, you know, Neptune sun, Neptune moon at the highest level can really enable us to tap into consciousness, divine source creation to all things, and the ultimate truth, provided we can sort of take a step back from the craziness of everything that's being put out there and tap into the source within in order to hear the truth from within ourselves, as opposed to what's being told out there, because the truth does reside in every single one of us. Remember, when it comes to Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, those three outer planets, they are transpersonal energies. They speak to collective matters, themes, stories, energies, portals, and that they are not easy energies to integrate on a personal level, which is why, you know, a consensus reality that defines 85% of the population on the planet basically means that most people live day to day in the world of Saturn, which defines this reality. When we go beyond Saturn, that's when we start to tap into Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. But they are transpersonal energies, and they require that opening within our own consciousness beyond the bounds of Saturn to even begin to touch the surface of them. They are really complex portals and energies, and they are not easy to integrate. So when I say something like, Neptune squaring this full moon, Neptune equals universal truth, universal love, ultimate truth, divine source creation to all things, which is not out there, it's inside us. Hence why we must turn within to feel that energy, to find it, to find it in stillness, in the quiet time of things, in meditation, sleep, dreams, etc. And that's not necessarily easy to do. Neptune is probably the trickiest and most difficult energy to handle in this 3D earth plane. So when you're talking about the sun and moon, which is the primary masculine and feminine within all of us, being squared by Neptune, it can create complete disillusionment and deception in our own perceptions. And in this case, perceptions and thoughts is really primary because we've got a full moon in Gemini. And Gemini, being ruled by Mercury, has got to do with our left linear mind, our perceptions, our thoughts, our personal opinions and ideas, right? How we are perceiving everything and how we are connecting the dots. That's Gemini. And the Sagittarius component is, well, what the hell does this all mean? Sagittarius is the truth seeker. It's connected to natural law, natural truth, and how we might find meaning in everything that we are perceiving and interpreting and observing. And there's a conflicting energy between these two by Neptune. And so, at worst, it can be a total sense of disillusionment of what we are seeing, or a greater sense of integration with our own sense of truth within, which comes from the highest source, Neptune. So it is a very, very tricky energy because, again, the outer planets, transpersonal energies, are never easy to integrate from that personality conscious level. The personality is extremely important, the ego. If we didn't have that, we'd have no sense of identity, a unique sense of identity. The downside to that is that it makes us, doesn't make us, but we have this sense of separation. And on the one hand, that's important because it gives us a sense of our own unique identity, but it also eludes us into believing that we are separate from the one source, and we're not. We are one and the same. We are born from that and we return back to that always. So it is a tricky energy. Neptune square the full moon and Neptune square Mars, at a very mundane, what I would consider uninspired level. It's dodgy actions by certain people. And so, depending on what's going on in your life, you might want to watch that. Like, people's intentions just may not be what you think they are, right? You just always need to be aware of that when it comes to Mars Neptune. This is a full moon, so it should bring it to light, though. It should clear it up and illuminate it for you. The danger being Mars Moon creating impulsive sort of reactions to things that may later bring some regret. So that comes down to our own sense of observing what gets triggered inside us and trying to respond rather than react, which is not an easy thing to do when you're talking about Moon Mars, both instinctual type of energies and archetypes. I think the Uranus being quincunx Sagittarius here brings in obviously the quality of authenticity, truth, freedom. It is an inconjunct, so an inconjunct typically speaks to perhaps needing to make some type of adjustment or changing your mind about something and just leaving something behind altogether. That is always a typical manifestation of an inconjunct aspect. And because it's in conjunct the Sun, which is in Sagittarius, then it might have to do with some type of ideology that you've been attached to, holding on to, thinking it was the right sort of ideal and ideology to have. And the Uranus is coming through saying, well, how much truth is there really in this ideology that you are holding on to, and how much is it allowing you to be really authentic to yourself, as opposed to just believing in something because somebody's presented it, somebody's saying it to you, or whatever it may be. There is a sense of needing a greater sense of authenticity and freedom within our own path, basically. It's not really an easy energy, but it requires some type of adjustment for sure. Chiron is trine the Sun and obviously then sextile the Moon, so that's nice because that adds, trines and sextiles are an energy that has no resistance. Sextiles are opportunities, and trines basically harmonize the energies that are interacting together. Chiron is always about looking more deeply into the fears of not being accepted and being rejected, right? Always inviting us into digging deeper into the pain that we hold on to through the experiences we've been through in life, this life and every other lifetime for that matter. So, in trine and sextile just offers a window, an opportunity to perhaps bring more illumination, full moon, into cultivating the Chiron energy into our life, right? There's a trine also from Saturn to the Moon. That's quite good. I don't like Moon and Saturn energy at all, but if I had to pick an aspect, I'd pick a trine because it can bring in a lot of stability on that emotional level. It can ground us and give us a sense of being able to cope with the emotional roller coaster of things that might come up. And roller coaster is not a bad word here, with the Mars energy being so prominent with this full moon. Saturn brings in a bit of a stabilizing force, so that's really great. They're the main aspects. Also, I see Juno very closely squared to this full moon, so square the Sun, square the Moon, and square Mars. Now, given Mars is in the picture, once again, it's a planet of conflict, competition, challenge, confrontation, irritation, and so forth. And Juno is the principle of relationships, That can be in personal or business relationships. Given this is a full moon, which brings things to a climax, as it were, there may be certain people that experience tremendous conflict in personal relationships. That would not surprise me at all. And because we're talking about Gemini and Sagittarius, the axis of this full moon, then the debate, conflict, arguments, and so forth are really going to be highlighted in the arena of personal opinions and beliefs. Sagittarius, personal opinions, Sag, and what I believe to be true, Sagittarius, right? And so one person might be saying, no, well, I think this is true. And the other person will be saying, well, no, that's not true. This is actually true. Here it is. There's the truth of the story, blah, 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 right? And whilst that sounds really kind of perhaps insignificant to some extent and really kind of futile type of stuff, these things can be, really pronounced during a full moon, and they can bring in tremendous conflict that can really end and separate relationships and things like that. So yeah, it's a difficult energy, right? There's no trying to make it a walk in the park when it's not. It's a square aspect. Square implies conflict, but conflict and square aspects means change as well. It means that there'll be an action, a course of action taken, because the conflict that arises is uncomfortable, but it forces us to make a particular decision and take a particular course of action. Now, in the mix of all of this, we must also note that there's tremendous mutable energy, which I briefly mentioned right at the beginning, I think. And so mutability is kind of interesting because, at a really optimum high level, it enables us to be flexible and fluid, which is great, because the opposite to that is to be completely stubborn and completely fixed and completely stuck, which is the fixed energy, right? This is mutable, so it means fluidity, going with the flow, moving in and out of new experiences and so forth, and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, it can also lead us to paths where we're not anchoring into anything. We're just kind of swimming in this ocean and not being able to find a point to anchor our path into. That's kind of like the downside of mutability. But we're talking about a window of a short period of time, because very soon we're going to switch into cardinal energy on the solstice when the sun goes into Capricorn. Venus is virtually, she's heading towards the end of her journey in Sag. Mercury has just recently ingressed into Capricorn. And so in very, very soon, like a week or so, couple of weeks actually, we're going to switch from all this mutable energy and step into cardinal energy. We're going to have Jupiter going into Aries, which is another cardinal sign. So the energies are going to shift from mutable to cardinal very, very soon. So in other words, this is not a huge wave of a window of, mutable chaos, as it were, but it is a full moon in Gemini. It is the last full moon of the year. It is conjunct Mars, so I expect a little bit of heat to present itself, right, collectively and in our own personal lives. But we always have a choice in how we choose to respond or react to these energies and to our life circumstances, provided we can bring in some level-headed awareness, and also realize that my opinion and my idea is exactly that. Doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's the truth. It may be right for me and it may be my truth, but it's not necessarily somebody else's truth. That's the hook where Gemini can become undone, right? That's the shadow side to Gemini. It's the hook of, this is my idea, I know it's right, and so therefore you're wrong. It splits things up. Okay, that's just the tendency it has to do with Gemini and its own mind and thought processes and so forth. And so that's the problem. You know, argumentative, conflicting things can come out of this. There's no question about it. I think that's kind of it, really. And then we have a new moon in Capricorn. Once all that Sag energy, once the sun, you know, moves into Capricorn, we're going to have a new moon in Capricorn, and that will be the last new moon of 2022. So we're very close to the end of this year, and frankly, I'm quite thankful that this year has come to an end. It's been a really difficult year, actually, to say the least. Let's see if there's anything else that I wanted to mention. I guess just one other thing with the Gemini energy and the full moon, because there's such a strong identification of my idea is correct and therefore yours must be wrong, that expands into an identification with knowledge. So somebody has written an article, has created a graph of some sort, and you know, has a very strong conviction about that particular piece of information belonging to them. And once again, that's the identification of an idea. I guess, you know, when we think about, when we can step out of our own personal identity and identity of our own thoughts and ideas, and we expand into the bigger picture, which is Sagittarius, and then go even further than that and go into Neptune, which is oneness, the entirety of everything, right, of all things, then what does really belong, let me say that again. Does anything really belong to us? Can we really claim ownership over anything, given that ideas, philosophies, dreams, creations, creativity are born in different waves through different souls, repeat, recycle, evolve as well. But can anybody really say, you know, that belongs to me, as it were? There are certain things that we can say that person was the inventor of a particular theory, model, whatever it is. Sure, I completely get that. But even that was born out of dreaming into the field of consciousness. Can anybody say that the field of consciousness belongs to them solely? I don't think anybody could ever say that. And I think that's an important truth to contemplate when we are in a conflicting space mentally with a personal identification of an idea or of a thought or of an opinion or whatever it may be. Because when we remember the bigger picture, nothing belongs to anybody and nobody's taking with them anything with them when they leave. That helps me actually become a lot more objective and detached about perhaps what I might perceive as something being my own, as it were. Because nothing is separate, everything is connected, and a lot of things repeat, recycle, and so forth. So who owns anything at the end of the day is what I'm trying to say. Hey, that's just my personal opinion. No, I'm kidding, I'm being funny. Perhaps it is my personal opinion, I suppose, to an extent, but I would be more inclined to say that I feel that that is a universal truth with the understanding of the field of consciousness to the ever so little ability that I may have. So anyway, wishing you all a happy full moon. Remain cool, keep calm. Mars activates, things that sometimes are not necessarily pleasant. On the upside, it can be very empowering from a position where somebody might need to tap into that warrior archetype within to express themselves emotionally with courage and strength and a sense of self-empowerment, right? And that's wonderful, when that's necessary and we can tap into that. The thing is that that's not seen as much as the part of Mars that is just reactive and aggressive and over assertive to the top, where it pushes other people away and does it with conflict that is just Mars. Mars is war, Venus is peace. You couldn't get more literal, beautiful archetypes to demonstrate love and war. And hence the old saying, I think it was back in the 60s, make love, not war. That phrase is purely Mars Venus. And so Mars is Mars is Mars, Venus is Venus is Venus, right? And so just need to remember that when we are feeling into this full moon energy. And with that, of course, full moons are typically loaded anyway. That's a full moon, is this full embodied, impregnated moon, this energy, right? That's just ready to just go boom, especially with Mars right there. So perhaps just some reflection upon that. See you guys very soon with more. Much love, many star blessings, and happy full moon. Thanks for watching, and feel free to share and subscribe if you're new to my channel. And let me know if you've got a moon Mars conjunction in your own chart. And I would bet my last dollar that relationship between you and your mother has never been an easy one. I would bet my last dollar on that. Okay, see you soon. Bye.